Hello, this is Yummy Pajama Man, and welcome to my next tutorial in Python. And we're going to be learning about repetition structure. And so the first part of this tutorial, I'm just going to talk about the while loop repetition. And then in my next tutorial, I will be discussing the for loop repetition. So this is just a while loop. So I've already written out the code right here, so you can pause the video and write down all the code if you want to, or you can watch. And okay, so I'll run the program so you'll know what the output is before I discuss anything, and make sure that everything's okay, and then it gets out of the while loop. So everything's okay and it checks out. So what a repetition structure such as a while loop is, it causes a block of statements to execute repeatedly. So under the while loop while clause here, we have our block underneath, which will execute over and over and over again. Why would you need a repetition structure such as a while loop? So the reason why you would need a while loop is if you need to repeat a block of code over and over again, and potentially go into infinity for the while loop. So if you have a block of code that you want to repeat over and over again, you want to put it into a while loop, which I did right here. And so this is called for the while loop, it's called a condition controlled loop, because this is the condition that is tested within the while clause. So if this expression right here, this expression will return either a true or false. So it'll say 0 less than 5, it's going to return true because it's true. And so it's going to go into the block of code. It's going to go to the function, which I'll discuss in a little bit, and then it's going to go down to the very bottom, and it's going to increment count by 1. So this is just a way to increment. I don't remember if I discussed this or not. You can do it this way, or you can increment by 1 by just saying count assignment operator and then say count again plus 1. So that's just the same statement. So you can do count plus or equal to 1, or count assignment operator count plus 1, either way. And so yeah, so that's the while condition statements. And so okay, so I'm going to discuss everything. So what you can see is the while loop. I discussed it and what's inside the body of, or the block of code. And so what's happening before the while loop, I actually put in a variable that is a primer read, which is what my professor calls it like every single day. So it's in my head. So it's called a primer variable. So it's assigned 0. It tests the variable to make sure if it returns true or false. If this wasn't here, count would not be defined anything. So that's why I define it before I use the while loop. If it wasn't there, this while loop would not work. So make sure you initialize count to whatever number, and then use that variable within the expression to test to see whether this will return either true or false. So you have to have a prime read. Always have a prime read before a while loop. So within the while loop, we have our function named count_info, and then passing to its arguments count, which is this right here. So we're passing 0 for the first iteration. So it goes to 0 here, and this is what's calling the function named count_info. This is what's defining the function here. This is what's defining count_info. This is what's calling the function named count_info, which is what we talked about before this tutorial. So if I pass 0 to count, so 0 will be assigned, well, I'm sorry, this 0 is going to go into here. So that 0 is going to be initialized to the variable named c, and so it'll go into this block of code and say the count is use a format built-in function, and that c, which is 0, is going to say 0 comma, I'm going to set it to 1 decimal place and then to a float, so it's going to be 0.0. And then the next line is it's asking the question, and then after the prompt in the input function, it's going to wait for the user to type whatever, and then the user press enter to get out of this function. So after the user press enter, it'll get out of this function and then continue on with the second statement in the while loop. So it's going to increment count 0 to 1. So this 0 is going to go here, plus 1 is 1, and that 1 is going to be assigned to count. Because remember, anything on the right side of the assignment operator will perform first before assigning it to the left side of the operator. So just remember that. And that's it. So let's see it again. So let's run module. So we've seen repetition structure for the while loop, and we've seen calling the functions in the loop itself. So if I press enter, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, and so what if I wanted to make this while loop infinite, which is probably you've seen me do it before to test something a few tutorials back, in which case I said while true. If you want to explicitly put in a true or false in the while, you can do that. Or if you want to make this, for example, run infinitely, that means you can't have this right here. So if I put a comment line right here, this while loop will actually run infinitely, because this variable count is what terminates your while loop as it increments. So once count iterates to the 5th time, which count will be initialized to 5, this expression will return false, and then this block will not run again. But since I put a comment line here, that's not the case. I have no way to terminate this expression here now, as you can see. So if we run the module, so if we do enter, yeah, so it just loops all over again. It doesn't change the count variable. You just do it infinite times. And that's the infinite loop, which I'm controlling because I'm using a input function here. So that's why it stops in the middle, and it's waiting for me to press enter. And that's pretty much it. So if you're in a situation where this happens, so it's iterating over and over and over again, and you want to get out, make sure to press Control C, and then it'll just give you an error, keyboard interrupt. I did that on purpose, so I got out. So I'm out of the shell. So yeah, so that's the infinite loop. We've seen the function here as well. Before I go, I just want to review the function's local variable scope, just as a review, because we went over that pretty quickly a few tutorials back, and so let's go over that again. So what you need to do, you see two functions here called main and count_info. Make sure you define your functions first before you call your function here, because if you try to call your function and that function main, for example, isn't in memory, or you didn't define it first, then it'll return an error because it's not defined in memory. So make sure you define your functions first before you call your functions. And you're probably wondering, oh, why isn't count_info not outside here as well? The reason why, see this right here? You see this is calling before the count_info is defined. That is the reason why this actually works is because what this program is doing is it's going, when I say run module, what's happening is each and every line in this program is going to turn this keyword def into zeros and ones, this main zeros and ones. So pretty much everything you see here is going to turn into zeros and ones, even this one right here, into zeros and ones. So after it interprets the whole language and turns everything into zeros and ones, and there's no error, there's no interpreter error, so now we have this whole script that is in zeros and ones. And so now it goes into wanting to run that zeros and ones. So when I want to run the zeros and ones, it'll go down to, okay, count underscore info parentheses count parentheses. This is already defined, the count underscore info inside the main function. And then count underscore info is defined itself here before calling the main function. So that's why it doesn't return an error. So if this main function, as it was interpreted as zeros and ones, was put in between, let's do like control X. If I put the main function, calling the main function here, for example, it'll actually return an error. So if we run the module, yeah, so it gives me an error named name error, and then the description of the error, global name count underscore info is not defined. And the reason being is because I called the main function before this function was defined. So what happens is this is all turned into zeros and ones. It's fine. It's good to go. And then it goes down to main, or actually the whole thing is turned into zeros and ones. And then it goes down to main, which is in zeros and ones, calls it first before defining this function in memory. And then it goes back up to main and then runs main, count assignment. You know what this does. It goes to while loop, tests the condition, it returns true, and then it goes down to here and says, okay, I'm calling count underscore info parentheses count parentheses, okay, but I'm calling it before it's defined, which is bad. If I put the main function down here like I did before, what's going to happen is, same process, it'll go down to count underscore info, but this is already defined before calling main. Because what happened is, if I move this back, is it'll run the whole program, turn it into zeros and ones, and then it'll go up to here, it'll go down here and say, oh, I want to call the main function after defining the count underscore info function, and then it'll go in the main function and then run everything, and then go to here and say, okay, this is defined in memory, now I want to call it. So that's why this program works the way that I was talking about. And that's it. So that's the program with the function. If you want to have the while loop not have an infinite loop, you want to put the variable that you're testing at the very end. And make sure that each time you iterate the loop, that there's some way to potentially get out of the while loop after some iteration. And that's it. So that is the while loop structure. In the next tutorial, I'll discuss the for loop structure as well. So I'll see you in the next tutorial.